Welcome to the Co-Creators Podcast. I'm Chloe Anderson.
And I'm Lakita Williams, and we help leaders and organizations build the future of work.
Hello, co-creators. Welcome back to the Co-Creators Podcast. I am so excited because we are kicking off our first guest episode of our AI workplace and culture series with Martha Shaughnessy. Martha is the founder and CEO of The Key PR, which is a PR firm based in the Bay Area. Martha has worked with tech companies, startups, nonprofits, you name it, she's worked with them over the past 20 years. She founded The Key in 2017 with a mission to deliver high impact, no BS communications to her clients. What I really appreciate about our conversation with Martha is that Martha's not just observing, she's using AI in her company. She's working with tech startup clients who are building with AI, and she's helping navigate all the messy, real implications of this moment that we're in. We talk about what's actually happening in the startup world right now, and it's pretty much all AI all the time. We dig into why communications needs to be involved at the earliest stages of strategy, how to think about crisis communication when the tools and rules keep changing, and what it means to co-create work when everything is shifting underneath us. Martha brings really sharp thinking to all of this, along with what she calls her punk-ass perspective on who gets to dominate the tech conversation. All right, with that, let's dive in.
Martha, thank you so much for being here. I think the question that has been on my mind is I know how connected the Key PR is to startups, technology, and that industry. What are you hearing about AI in today's startup ecosystem?
I'm not hearing about a lot other than AI in today's startup ecosystem. So it's a pretty multi-layered answer, I would say. So I'll start with the fact that most companies are building with AI and or retrofitting with AI. So to ignore the weight of that is already kind of being behind the eight ball, I think. Some are what I would call AI native, building from the ground up in this environment. Some are layering new capabilities into existing products and systems. And then there's also, in addition to that side of things, kind of how are we implementing AI in our day-to-day work internally, with our clients, what tools are they asking us to use, et cetera, et cetera. So there's kind of the inside out way of thinking about it and the outside in way of thinking about it. And then I would put it at the like hyper macro level, which is it's pretty hard to talk about anything else. And that goes all the way from a very kind of dystopian, what will the world be level, all the way down into like very tactical applications. So I would say it's kind of the through line of today, and definitely the conversation we should be looking to have more and more of in the future.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. It feels a bit like the Wild West. Would you say that's accurate description?
Yes. And I try to make this analogy in the crypto era, and I think it's even more true in AI. Like the Wild West, you're going to have like a very extractive winner community, and there are going to be people who lose out a lot. So if you look at like Wild West dramas and everything else, there's the like, you know, rich New Yorker who takes the stagecoach across and establishes the first bank. And then there's everybody else who's like kind of hard scrabbling, and some of them are ending up, in the mud, and some of them, break through and have a transformational experience. But the reestablishment of the world order is definitely something that's kind of at stake, except in this case, those that are already on top have like such a dramatic lead that it's going to be a really different way of looking at things, I think, than like the traditional Wild West if we
Oh,
want
wow.
to make
Of
that.
technology. It's
Yeah,
so
just because if you're a hyperscaler, Google, Amazon, OpenAI, those companies, the amount of money and resource they have is so far beyond anyone else that um, I think that layer of AI it's already kind of claimed, and the rest
mm,
is going to be where most of the conversation is happening.
yeah. So with the fact that the key PR works mostly with startups, well, works with a lot of startups,
Hmm.
how are you advising them to balance kind of that competitive pressure to adopt AI quickly or to leave from AI first and the alternative, right? Which is either
Hmm.
to be left behind or like, is that a false narrative of like humanity first? How are you helping them?
Um, I think it's a little bit of a both and. One of the things that we have talked about for a long time, and I think is exceptionally true in this environment, is for most people, technology is magic. So
Mhm.
how it works is kind of a non sequitur for most people. A technical buyer, different, obviously, but when you have a founder or a product marketer, whomever we're working with, how they built it and how it works is kind of where they spend all of their energy. And it's how they got their investment dollars because that's where their technical moat sits. And there's a lot of how, because theirs is the brain that actually saw a future and was able to build how we would get there. Our job is really like, why does anyone care? And
Mhm.
so that has always been true in tech comms. I think it's especially true now because AI in particular is one of those topics that's like it's everywhere, but if you ask most people what it is, they would not know.
Uh-huh.
Um, and they're inside of AI, they're like, well, that's actually, general intelligence, but that's machine learning, but this is da, 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 da," and they go like really deep down a rabbit hole of like what's actually AI. And most people are like, this thing happens by magic when I talk to a machine. Like, that's cool, right? But why? Why will it help me? And so we do a lot of talking to companies about AI in this moment is a reason to look again at why you matter and where the
Mm.
value comes from in what you have built. And if AI truly enhances that value, that's where the AI conversation should happen.
Okay.
So, for example, we're working with a health tech company who is in what's called revenue cycle management. How do you get health systems to get paid by insurance providers and payers? And that can be a very, wonky B2B story, like company A
Yeah.
pays company B based on X bill, blah, blah, blah. But fundamentally, it's about how does the American health system work and what happens when the money doesn't flow as it's supposed to. And that's a very human story. And so our job is to plumb the data and the customer cases and everything else to find that like we think of it at two layers, like the emotional kind of selfish layer. Can I, as a reader, feel what it's like to have my insurance claim denied and the panic that is induces from there? Or can I, as a reader, think about like, oh, the whole world will be better when this flows better, right? So this global impact and this like selfish impact is where most of the storytelling comes from.
Okay.
Although a lot of the marketing is in that middle layer of like business one to business two. So
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I love how you can tell you're a natural storyteller. You just broke that down and made it super clear for us. I know for the key, like the purpose for the company is to write a new story. As we are in this AI age, how are you thinking about applying the keys company purpose to this conversation and story about AI, with which has a lot of controversy alongside it as well?
Yeah. I think part of it is just ensuring we're not looking away from where the controversy sits.
Mhm.
Um, and addressing, going back to that kind of emotional connection, there's a lot of fear. A lot of the controversy comes around fear. Um, I think one of the benefits we provide is a broader perspective to a lot of the companies we work with because you
Mhm.
have a very I mean, you have to have a fairly binary brain in a lot of ways to be a technologist, like literally, right? Things are black and white. The code either works or it doesn't work. It's a very, well, it's imaginative and creative and everything else. There's a kind of deterministic element to how you think if you're in that world. And our job is to be like, and what about, right? And so, there's so many places where AI is going to really help. We're working with a company, for example, that tackles literacy. Um,
Mm,
so they do K through 6 literacy in a one-to-one tutoring way, and the only way they're able to do that is with AI. So it's
mhm,
voice recognition, and the kids don't have to leave class to go be with a reading specialist, and they're able to meet each kid where they are. And it's like giving these underfunded, understaffed teachers in classrooms a whole class of assistants to then meet each kid where they are in a way that also doesn't single anyone out. So super awesome. Highest level impact is with English language learners, kids who are behind based on literacy at home, and kids who have, learning difficulties. And I have a son who's like extremely dyslexic, and I like literally started to weep when I met them. Like, oh my God, if he had had that, how amazing would that be? And I come from a household of educators. So thinking about multiplying their intent with their students in a way that's actually possible is just like that is the core of what this company does. So that is a great example of an AI company that actually has been deploying AI before it was cool, but now has to kind of like navigate how rapidly the conversation is changing, and that controversy has actually kind of like emerged around them because suddenly there's a lot of players. So like how much to jump into what conversation and what leads and all those different types of things, and not to get distracted from their core purpose by kind of like the flashiest piece of the conversation. That's a part of counsel. Um, and we won't work with companies we don't want to see succeed,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Which I'm sure, has some checks that will not get cashed on our balance sheet, but I feel okay about that. And I think, I have this kind of like um, punk ass part of my personality. And when Silicon Valley Bank crashed a couple of years ago, like the general ethos in the country was like, good, fuck those guys, right? And it was so eye-opening because I get to be in the room with all these like visionary thinkers who are really trying to like figure out how to make things better. And
Mm,
also, the conversation is dominated by these like too big to fail, socially inept, extractive billionaires who dominate the airwaves in every level. And so trying to figure out A, how to not let that kind of perspective lead in any of the conversations we're involved in, but also how to like get people to notice that this innovation actually has a lot of benefit to them or perspective benefit to them, to their communities, everything else is part of where I think I get the most excited about the work.
That I love that, and that also feels like where the messaging, right? You have this messaging from these huge companies, and then they're in the news, and there's controversial takes that they have, and a lot of like a total lack, it feels like, in morality. And so it's just really interesting to it's an interesting problem figuring out how do we get more media coverage? How do we get more
It's
information
so
out
hard.
there, right? About the good, because there is, to your point, there is so much good. There's so much from an inclusion and diversity perspective. There's so much accessibility that AI can provide in exactly what you gave. And it is, I mean, and I know these things and I still get overwhelmed with the media and I'm like,
Totally.
what's it doing to us, right?
Yeah. And it's both, right? And there's a lot of I definitely get a little bit spun up by the like concurrence of very clear damage from like social media still playing out, right? We're like still kind of peeling the onion on like all the ways that we've really done like significant lasting damage to people and their psyche and to society and to democracy and to like systems level change in a way that was like, oh, unchecked, this stuff can be bad. And now, while that's happening on one side and we're trying really hard to unwind it, we're also putting in place an even more powerful set of tools with the same people running a lot of it,
Yes.
where if anything, the biggest miss is like it is running in parallel to this like anti-inclusion, or not anti-inclusion, just,
Mm-hmm.
purely meritocratic
Yeah.
way of running things. It's like you need different perspectives in the room. You need social science in the room. You need people who are like, oh, pump the brakes, but I think if we're driven by fear as individuals, there's this like fear of being overtaken that is putting speed ahead of consciousness
Yeah.
in a lot of places. And I think that is probably where the biggest risk sits.
Yeah, and we're seeing that as well, I think, in the work that we do around culture. And so
Hmm.
I'm curious, as I know how much influence that having a communications expert and a PR agency in the room can be for leaders of organizations. Do you bring culture and leadership and humanity into the conversation when you're talking to these leaders? And what does that look like if
Um,
you do?
yeah, I mean, I think part of that starts with our sales process, which is like we really show up as who we are, right? You're not going to be surprised if I'm
Mm-hmm.
asking tough questions in the room because I probably will have asked them before we signed a contract. So, for companies that are looking for like a yes man execution only partner, like we're not it. But in the culture side of things, a lot of it has to do with, you know, assuming fear in the face of
Mm-hmm.
change,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's so many layers right now because job security is lower than it's ever been. So there's like this undercurrent of fear that I think any company should be aware of. There's also a speed and pressure at the top of most organizations that may or may not translate into, like, intentionally translate into communication with the rest of the team, but is definitely felt by the rest of the team, where it's kind of
Mm-hmm.
like, we gotta go faster and do more and da, 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 da. And like if your leadership team is like in that tense hold, it's gonna be impactful for the rest of the team. So I think going back to the like why, um not how necessarily, but like, what is the core of your culture that holds everything together, and how can you stay true to that in a time of rapid change? Because if anything, that's all that's been persistent over the last 5 years, is that nothing is certain. And I think leaders right now are exhausted.
Mm-hmm.
They have had to rewrite and throw out and readjust and rebudget and cut and then grow and then cut and then grow, ad nauseum for 5 years in a way that I don't, hasn't happened in my lifetime, because each of the other moments of great change, whether it was like the end of the dot-com boom or 2008, they were kind of like a rapid ripping of the band-aid that
Okay.
went real dark and then kind of grew back. And ours is this time has been
Rolling. Yeah.
rolling. Yeah.
Yeah.
Rolling and ripping. um it's like getting tossed under the ocean, where you're like, oh, just kidding. And so I think, um as it relates to culture, having a strategic partner to help see outside your day to day is really important. That can be us. It can be someone like you. I rely so heavily on outside perspective because the culture piece of like, this is just happening to us, I need to fix this thing, is so easy to get trapped in. And I think the number of stakeholders all these leaders are navigating is enormous,
Intense.
right?
Yes.
And so having someone who can help you find that like core message, the real thread that will be persistent from your, maybe you took PE funding during the downturn and now you have more financial pressure, but you also have, you know, day-to-day employees who don't know anything about how the company financials are doing, but they're afraid for their jobs because of AI. Those people might be at opposite ends of the same topic. They might be working toward the same goal, but they're not thinking through the same primary selfish lens. And so really boiling down to like what is true for everyone I touch is I think where the big magic happens right now in culture and comms.
Yeah, I love that. I think it helps. We talk about systems thinking all the time, and I think that's critical in what's needed right now.
Mm-hmm.
One of the questions that I think we get and was on folks' mind when they knew we were talking to a PR leader was crisis communication, baby. And so
Mm-hmm.
how in this age of artificial intelligence and mistakes happening, deep fakes, all the things, how should leaders or organizations think about crisis communication? Should they be pre-planning? What's your take on that?
Yeah. Pre-planning.
Period. That's
Um,
the end of the
yeah, yes, period. I'm out. Yes, I always think like the better prepared you are, the less likely the thing is to happen, right? You're like, oh, I have these earthquake bags now,
I
and
love that.
thus I have not had an earthquake, knock on wood. But it's like if I didn't have them, what would happen? But I do think that the systems thinking and the crisis are connected because like what could happen with this change is often first considered from the positive. We will, make more money. We will move faster. We will be more productive. We will cut out this cost, whatever it is. So again, the application of AI can be in like how you record your call or how you take your notes, all the way up to like the entire organizational purpose. So this is a very broad answer, or like
Yeah.
very narrow answer to a very broad series of possibilities. But I think the um like where could this lead us and how would we prepare for that or how would we explain it? And I think the tendency right now and in general in crisis comms is to over explain, right?
Mm,
um and I always say this as an example when I'm talking to clients, like if you have an employee and they're like, oh, I'm sorry I'm late, I missed the bus, period. You're like, oh, okay, that happens. If they come in and they're like, I was on time, but then this garbage truck drove by and it splashed me, and then I had to go back and change my pants, and then I got in, but I was on the right bus, but then it had a flat tire. You're like, you're full of shit. Like, I want to query all of these little details. So similarly in crisis, I think that the like simplest truth um, is really important. Um, how that applies across all the different ways AI can go wrong right now is really hard. Um, because some of it comes from actually setting up some guardrails in advance. Like you're talking about deep fakes and like hallucinations and those types of things. Like part of it is like, do we do something at the level of importance where we cannot afford that? And if so, what guardrails do we have around the tools that my team is using? Because if you're, making fun Instagram posts and suddenly it's like a little bit wacky in where it goes, probably low stakes. If you are navigating healthcare billing, you are going to be working in a clean data environment and make sure that your tooling is thinking about those like governance and guardrails. And so some of it happens before, like preempting some of those crises. Um, and some of it comes from like, can you have a little holding statement as you suss things out? Because that's another thing, is the speed with which information spreads right now is so incredible that oftentimes you get dinged for your slow response, right? Obviously like the crisis comes hero of this year was the affair, the Coldplay affair. And now I'm gonna forget the name of the company. But there were like two things in that were
mm,
stood out. One was if you just hadn't looked like you got caught out, no one would have noticed.
yeah.
100%.
So like don't light yourself on fire because you made a mistake. So that's the first thing, is pause and be
Mhm.
like, is this as big a deal to anyone other than me as it is to me right now? So that's
I
check
love
number
that
one. And then check
realization.
number two is they just took so long to respond. And
Mhm.
so in the time from the observation and kind of the the busted nature of that moment to the official statement, it was like took over the entire planet, and you can't
Yeah.
pull that back in.
Yeah.
So those two things, like think through where it could go, have a little holding statement in place. So, God forbid something happens, you can put that out, and then really think about like, is the bus just late, or do you need to give people more information? Because every piece of information is reason for engagement, and oftentimes, mea culpa and move on is the right take.
Okay.
I I think it's really interesting as we're thinking about crisis communications, and I'm reflecting on just different things that have come through over the past year, like crises that companies have created for themselves because they haven't done, going back to what you were saying just before we started talking about this, they haven't thought about both ends of the spectrum. How are things going to impact people? And it made me think of like the Duolingo CEO coming out and talking about AI and XYZ, and just the flurry that that created, and concern and backlash. And I'm sure he's thinking, this great thing that I'm putting into place, not thinking through all the audiences. So going continuing with this crisis, how do you help companies think through those, like really think through, am I about to cause a problem for
Yeah.
myself? Right? Like,
Yeah. Um, one of the things I think that's important in this is like how you engage with comms. Um, because there are a lot of places where comms is kind of like an application layer. It's like a tactical bolt on, right? And that strategy is never going to help with what you just mentioned. So if it's like, oh, we now are done with this thing, can you go comms it? Like that is too late. Um, I always say like but we're the most effective like the earlier and messier we're involved in every single conversation. So if it's like concept level, hey, we're thinking about a thing, that's where you often like suss out those like traps you might be laying for yourself. Or also the other thing that happens is too often now, and this I think is starting to right size itself, but over in like the free will and gold falling from the sky, zero interest days, comms departments and agency partnerships got really overcomplicated and seriously siloed. So you'd be like, oh, I have a, in-house team, and there's a corporate team and a product team and a social team and a this team and a this team, and they each have their own agency partner. And then like maybe they all ladder up biannually into a strategy, and that is also where a lot of that goes wrong, because it's like I'm dealing with the thing that's on my desk, but I don't necessarily see the bigger picture. So like
Mhm.
one arm can accidentally like, lay the trap for the other arm
Yes.
because they're not thinking about it. And we had that case once with a client that uh by like happenstance, with after some riffs and some leaves and everything else, we had this kind of like cross functional view, and we're given an assignment that was from like the legal team to review some terms of services. And it was more like, grammar and blah, 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 blah. But it was like, oh, whoa, whoa. You're about to like show your whole ass with like this new product you're launching because of the terms of services. And like after kind of like pulling on all the threads, it was like, oh, we're only putting these out because this is when we put them out last year. So we're like, oh, we don't have to reissue them until this other date. And we were able to kind of like go all the way back up to the top and think about, why was the change going into place? How could we take the reins on the story? How could we preempt some of the places where people might be upset? What should we expect in terms of people being upset? Because that's the other thing. I think people overassume is that there's like some magical crisis calm solution where no one is mad. And if you messed up, like someone's gonna be mad.
what?
And like
Yes.
sometimes you just gotta take it because you fucked up, right? And
Yeah.
the doing the least harm in that is really the goal, not erasing other people's feelings or pretending, trying to pretend you didn't make a mistake. Um, and so that is a good example of like, had we been involved all the way at the front end of like, we have this new strategy and here's all the surfaces it's going to touch, then it would have been a faster solution. It ended up being okay, but came from like a, excavation and and a lot of like road clearing to be like, no, 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 we really have to have this conversation before stuff goes out. So that's the other part is like, and this goes directly into your work, is like overlayered businesses also often get in the way of this stuff because it's like, oh, well, that's a, P3.9. They can't have this conversation with a blabbity blabbity blah. So
Level
like by the
5,
time
yeah.
you've, yeah, whatever. And so I think AI, the speed of it and the fact that it is often deployed in one place but not seen across the org is where a lot of that risk is exposed.
Well,
Yeah.
and it's really interesting thinking about and how companies, you were talking about agencies and being, being siloed when we had all that money. I, especially in small businesses, you are seeing a lot of people try and leverage AI to save money and not hire this person or that person or partner. And like that's a great example of like AI is not, I mean, eventually, if you feed it all the information and do all the things, at which point you basically have a full-time person who's doing your comms internally. Like it's never going to replace, I shouldn't say never. Right now, it doesn't feel like it could replace because it's not going like replace hiring a PR firm or having communication specialists because it doesn't have that full context. It can hallucinate, it can do XYZ. So I'm always like, yes, I love AI as people are asking me about it in terms of it can help you. And you still need expertise. You
Mhm.
still
Oh,
need
more
someone,
more
right?
than
Like,
ever, yeah.
yeah,
But I do think so. Um, that's an interesting one because I think the people and jobs that are going to be have the hardest time justifying are the like get it off my desk and move it along jobs. And
Mhm.
there are a lot of jobs like that.
Mhm.
And I like drool over the idea of having had AI when I was a junior person because I hated those jobs. Where it's like, oh, I did the thing and now I need to like write out all the steps I did and then also make a report and then also like right align all the margins and then that, not to date myself and then like print it and cut it out and like paste it and like,
Whoa.
there were all, yeah, we're talking paper here, people. But it was so much process to get to the meat of the job. And
Mhm.
those process jobs are going to be automated and are already being automated
yes, yep,
very quickly. And I think the mistake that some companies are making is then assuming we don't need junior people
Yeah.
because the jobs that we created for junior people, which were too process and too little um,
Strategy.
context and
Yeah.
strategy, can be replaced. And it's like,
Mhm.
yes, and then who comes and does the next job? And so I do think it for the right person makes those entry level jobs like way more effective and satisfying. And
yes,
what a
yes.
great opportunity for young people who are digitally native, who are coming up in this AI space to be like, oh, hey, PS, here's all the AI tools I want to use to help do my job better. Is that good with you? Can we implement them across the company? Because that is a huge value to the
Huge.
organization.
Yeah.
Um, and like thinking differently about stuff, right? Like the if we're retrofitting a lot of processes that were built in a world that no longer exists, as opposed
Yeah.
to thinking of a whole new way, you're just losing so much
So much value.
opportunity.
Yeah.
And I think, that's we started the key in response to kind of like digital comms, which,
Mhm.
we were in 2017, so it wasn't like brand new, but agencies still had the billing structure, the team structure, the business model, everything was built on a time of phones and paper and faxing and everything else. And
Mhm.
so throwing some of that out really allowed us to do some of what we wanted to do institutionally. And now I'm like, oh, I think I kind of accidentally built it for AI.
Yes. Yes. And that's the future thinker and
Right?
leader
Yeah.
that you are, right? It takes having a sense of agility and innovation built into the culture, which is one of the things that we encourage leaders to think about and hire for all the time. So with what you outlined there, Martha, I think it's so many implications. And the thing that kept coming up for me is like, okay, so now in this age and as we're moving forward, how do we, and to borrow our name, how do we co-create work? What does
Mm-hmm.
that look like in this next phase of growth? Both in how you are thinking about it and partnering with organizations and how you think about it as the CEO of the Key.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's an existential question if I ever heard one. I mean, thinking about it internally first, um, I've always been like a really annoying why person, and that is just getting more and more essential. Why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? What does success of this thing look like? And then once you have alignment around that, how you do it becomes more obvious. And I think that's a perfect way to frame up AI usage, for example. Like I use it every single day, and it's usually to shortcut my own learning about something where, it's like, oh, we are kind of an industry agnostic agency, which I love because my brain is insane. But for some people, it's like, oh, I was just learning about e-commerce and now I have to learn about healthcare. And I just learned healthcare and now I have to learn about, housing policy. And if you're able to say, explain to me like I'm 5 years old, the history of the American mortgage. Why does it exist? How does it work? Where has it been of service and where have people been left out? You get to come to a level of expertise. Obviously, you have to check sources, you have to do all those things, but just like the general framework that is available at your fingertips to then query from is amazing. So that I think is like from there, then you can be like, why does this product matter? But if you're spending 3 weeks being like, what is a mortgage? Right? Like that slows you down. And so that's a good example of how we use it. Recording, amazing. Because like I do a lot of intake calls. I'm a big verbal processor. Being able to hand off my notes without having to take any notes is a game changer for my team because I
Yeah.
used to be like, oh, you want the notes from the new business call? It says the name of the company, and that's it.
I know. And three dots.
I am
Yeah.
there with you.
Maybe there's a bullet, but there's like no words after the bullet. But like if you ask me, I could probably figure it out for you. So like that kind of stuff too, of like where are your strengths and how do you enhance them? Where are some shortcomings that you might be able to build some scaffolding around? And then how do you like mash that together with the rest of your team so that AI really gives us this like 1 + 1 = 3 or like 1 + 1 = 5, really, in
Mhm.
terms of the capacity of the team. And that I think is where there's like a really big pause, an M dash, one might say, before Chat GPT. But then what do you do with that capacity is the
Yeah.
question. And I think that's where a lot of people are trying to just shove in as much productivity as possible. And then you're getting a lot of AI slop,
Yeah.
which is like, oh, if I can do 100 times more things in the day, I should produce 100 bad things,
Things, yes.
as opposed to spend just as much time pulling in all those things to really refine one single page of brilliance. And that is where I think the value will come from, but that is ahead of most people.
Yeah, I think so too. And you mentioned earlier, like someone who is newer to maybe working, newer to their first role, for instance, coming in and bringing their expertise and
Mm-hmm.
their background into how we approach this challenge, right? And think about it. Is that something that you are putting in place at the Key, or are there any tips that you can give leaders who
Yeah.
are thinking about this?
Um, this summer we were a little bit lower in client work than we needed to be. We had some apprentices in, and we had them do a whole summer project on like AI tooling, research and presentation. Like, what are you seeing? What tools do you think we might examine? And we have a whole like AI tools channel, where it's like, oh, I found this thing, I'm using it this way. So we haven't yet um, centralized on like, this is our suite that we all use. Although there are certain things like Canva and other things that have just like totally transformed our capacity
Mhm.
already. So that was one thing. But yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing I see is we're in an inflection point in
Mhm.
education to job pipeline
Yeah.
that I think is going to really it's going to stay hard for a minute because there's been so much of college that has turned into almost like white collar vocational school of like,
Mm-hmm.
here's what classes you take in high school in order to get into college. Here's what
Mm-hmm.
you should study in college in order to get your job. Here's how to write your resume. Here's how to do the thing because the fear of like not paying back the investment
Yeah.
was really high. Now that fear is higher, but the skill set of like following a manual is very
Yeah.
different than like figuring it out from a
Mm-hmm.
bunch of different disparate threads. And my hope is that that leads back to a kind of a broader educational um, structure where people are like, I'm just learning to learn, I'm learning to problem
Mm-hmm.
solve, I'm exploring my curiosity and my creativity because those are the skill sets that AI is really going to value the most because that is what a human can do differently than a computer. If you practice like applying, if you're a QA engineer, like all these kids who are like STEM is going to save you, like that's the first layer of folks who have already lost their jobs because they're an application layer and a computer can compute better than a person. Um, and same thing in comms. It's like if your job was just writing copy for a single kind of ad unit, like that job is probably not coming back. But if you can
Mm-hmm.
take that skill and like think about it in a bigger way, then you will likely enhance your creativity with the tools made available to you.
Yeah. Okay. So with that and the potential, like some upsides and some challenges, a question we've been asking is, are you optimistic? Are you bullish on AI or are you bearish? Are you feeling pessimistic when you think about it broadly?
I'm a both and. You can't ever
Yeah.
pin me
Yeah.
down. Um, I think there's gonna be a lot of damage done.
Hmm.
Um, a lot of it is going to be environmental and structural and infrastructure wise. We're already seeing, we work in some climate um, tech, and the demand for electricity to feed AI is so incredibly high. And you match that with um a regulatory environment which is functionally undoing all regulations for human safety and environmental controls, and that's going to do damage that we may not be able to ever undo. Right. So you're building data centers in Texas where there's already scarcity of water and being like,
Hmm.
hey, poor people, please shower less so these billionaires can get more electricity to feed the
Yeah.
AI,
Yeah.
which will not benefit you. Right. So
Mhm.
that is already happening and I think is going to happen in a devastating way for the climate, for people, for our electrical infrastructure. You're turning back on coal plants or extending refinery hours, all these things that we've been working decades to reverse. And if you multiply that toward other like infrastructure things, like the billions and probably actually like many trillions of dollars that are like going into data centers and the actual extraction of the ingredients that feed the chips and like all that stuff, like that ship has sailed, number one, and it is going to get worse. In terms of the actual value to people, I think I have a balance of optimism and pessimism. Um,
Mhm.
my hope, my like highest level systemic, like societal hope is that we graduate from a productivity first culture because the
Mhm.
productivity can be now given to something that is built only to be productive. So in a time where people's value has been measured in minutes and dollars and contribution to the stakeholders at the top of the mountain, that a lot of that may be automated and it will then open up human creativity and an investment back in community and reinforcing some of what's been lost in this first chapter of productivity culture, where we're seeing loneliness and division and everything else at like, a degree that we haven't seen before. And I think a lot of people have lost the ability to even think that way in this
Yeah.
environment. And so that's where my balance to that optimism sits is you have a lot of like, shh, don't ask the question, just watch the Kardashians and buy something from Amazon. Collect Stanleys and your life will be fulfilled. So like the numbing of
Yeah.
people as like the system has kind of like eaten out the core of humanity is pretty significant. And so I think the curiosity of required to imagine a whole new way is going to be a few people who hopefully get the influence required to actually like put some of that stuff into place.
Yeah. Mm.
Those are the people I want to work with. So if you're out there, give me a call.
Call the, call the key PR, one of the best in the business.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like a moment to be truly visionary.
Yes.
And then the other place in the, who will win and who will lose, I think there's like such a glut of investment into things that will functionally be a feature of some future company. And it'll be like the dot-com era where it was like so much excitement and then a gigantic cliff that everyone went over and a societal transformation unlike anything we've seen. So it's going to be, it's not going to be a smooth line up and to the right, but I do think the value of being able to put inanimate things to work for you so that you can be more human and your best self is going to benefit a lot of people.
Yeah. And I think it starts with conversations like this. It starts with leaders like you, that each of us has a choice to make, and we can contribute in our own way to build the system that we want to see on the other side of things. Mm.
Amen.
Martha, thank you so much for being with us.
So
We
much.
appreciate your brilliance and everything you
My
brought
pleasure.
together. Is there a way for people to learn more about the key PR? I think for companies who are looking for PR, it's a no brainer. And also, I think you all are just such a cool company to follow. So even if you aren't looking for PR, Martha's leadership and all the work that they do at the Key is brilliant. How can people connect with you?
I'm Martha at thekeypr.com, or for general inquiries, it's yo at thekeypr.com.
Of course it is.
And our website is thekeypr.com. You can find us on LinkedIn. That's where a lot of the conversation has moved. Um, Always up for a conversation. So this spending time thinking about big things is my favorite thing. So please reach out if anything connected with you as you're listening.
And we'll get all of that information into our show notes so you can find
Great.
all of those connections.
Beautiful. And you do it so brilliantly. So thank you for your leadership.
We hope today's conversation gave you something to think about and, more importantly, something you can use. If this episode resonated with you, we'd love for you to share it with another leader, entrepreneur, or friend who might benefit from hearing it. And for additional resources, frameworks, and tools related to our topic, please be sure to subscribe to our newsletter at cocreatework.com. And of course, if you have any question you'd like us to explore in a future episode, we would love to do that. So please send it to podcast@cocreatework.com. As always, thank you for being here and thank you for your leadership.